last month, Games Workshop have been dealing with a major crisis, and it looks like things are about to get a whole lot worse. In fact, I'm kinda shocked at just how bad this looks like it's going to get. And unfortunately, this isn't just an existential crisis for Warhammer. It's really bad for consumers, for wargamers as well, and we're all going to feel the pain. Well, we already are. And as a channel dedicated from the very beginning to being about advocating for consumers and wargamers, as well as clown law, I think it's time that someone hit back at Games Workshop. Because oh yes, haven't you heard? Games Workshop have been at war.
It's war.
And it's a war that they seem to be losing. No, it's not the war on your wallet. They've been winning that one pretty well. No, I'm talking about a different war. The war on scalping. A war that is going about as well as the war on drugs.
How long must we play?
Scalping is a massive problem for Warhammer right now, and the community have been complaining about it very loudly, very frequently, and very angrily. Because, of course they are. It's directly screwing over Warhammer fans and anyone that wants to get their hands on Warhammer products. It's seemingly tanking entire model ranges and screwing over the launch of games like Warhammer the Old World. It's making limited products like signed books 3 times more expensive than the already extremely expensive GW price point. The impact on consumers here is clear. Every time the Games Workshop put one of their big bundle boxes or one of their limited print books up for pre-order on their website these days, the products sell out in seconds. And then, a minute later, dutifully, they go up on eBay for hundreds of dollars more than the recommended retail price. And this is infuriating, but seemingly Games Workshop have been powerless to stop it. And after literal years of this problem, last month things finally came to a head. Black Library released the final book in the Siege of Terra series. Yes, indeed, it is finally the end of the Horus Heresy book series after like 18 years. This was a momentous occasion for anyone hoping to see Dark Eldar get the same 64 book treatment next. What? It could happen. But for those who have been following the Horus Heresy series since it was just a baby blurb in a wargame rulebook, it was a pretty exciting release. And to celebrate the launch, Games Workshop released a limited edition leather-bound copy of the book signed personally by author and teenage heartthrob Dan Abnett. Just one problem though, there were only 2,500 copies available, and it caused absolute mayhem as it sold out in seconds. Reports quickly flooded in that online scalpers had managed to get their hands on multiple copies of the book with the intention of reselling them at a marked up price for profit. But then, Games Workshop hit back, and they cancelled the orders of those resellers, and announced that they would be putting the reclaimed books up for sale on the following Wednesday. And there was much rejoicing. Games Workshop had finally delivered a black eye to scalpers. They had finally done something that'll show those black-hearted rogues. I'm talking about scalpers here in this instance, in case that wasn't clear. Then something happened. Wednesday arrived and it was even worse than the original release. Games Workshop implemented their famous online queuing system. They are a British company after all, and they even deployed a CAPTCHA system that rivaled the security of my local Chinese takeaway. Unfortunately, both of these fairness systems had major issues, freezing on some people and kicking others out of the website entirely. And to top it all off, the systems were totally ineffective. Scalpers still managed to get their hands on multiple copies of the books and sell them for profit. This was an absolute failure on Games Workshop's part, and the lesson that they learned from this loss was, well, nothing. They're just doing it all again. They're releasing another different limited edition book for pre-order this week. Yeah, and the book is extremely limited and will also happen to have a really high demand. It's the new Horus Heresy art book, an art book that has 6,500 copies. And make no mistake, you heard it here first, this too will be scalped.
Other breaking news. Water.
wet.
Admittedly, not the most daring of predictions. This is incredibly frustrating. I really can't express how much of an own goal this is. And many people took to Twitter to let Games Workshop know about their feelings on this matter. And while a lot of wargamers seem to be surprised, I'm not. Scalping has been a massive problem for Warhammer for years now, and before my very eyes, I've witnessed it get worse and worse and worse. And it seems like there's no real solution that has been offered up so far beyond just begging consumers not to buy from scalpers, which is basically the equivalent of begging a T-Rex not to eat you. Look, here's the thing, the T-Rex, it's gonna eat you. You're in Jurassic Park now, and you're made of delicious meat. You're fucked. People are going to buy from scalpers. Reddit posts begging people not to, calls from content creators to just say no to scalping. Well, they're all about as effective as the very special episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was in combating racial bias in the police force. Demonstrably, simply asking consumers to refrain from buying products at extremely inflated prices from balaclava-bound scalpers hasn't been working so far. Because, of course it hasn't been, and it won't. The solution to this problem isn't going to come from consumers. It can only come from one place. The Pentagon. No, wait, no. Games Workshop. Still, that would have been quite the twist. Scalping has been a major problem for every single limited release of Warhammer, from the limited edition books, to the army boxes, to the bundles, to extremely in-demand models like the Lion. Hell, remember the launch of the Leviathan box set? In the weeks up to its launch, there was a lot of speculation and a lot of worry that Leviathan would sell out instantly as well, and that wargamers would be left unable to buy into the new edition of Warhammer unless they paid a princely sum to a bandit. However, those fears ended up being totally unfounded. Leviathan was actually affordable at launch to anyone who could afford to buy it at retail price. Leviathan didn't have a scalping problem at all. In fact, the boxes could still be bought way after release. They sat in stores and slowly trickled out into the community, sometimes even at a discount. That's what I like to call a healthy product launch. And this tells us that there is a solution to the quote-unquote scalping problem. And it's very simple. Print more product. Leviathan had a massive print run in the lead up to release last year. Games Workshop understood the demand, and they wanted everyone to get a box. Leviathan was the launch of 10th edition, and seals of that box would be indicative of whether 10th edition would live or die. Pretty good motivation to make sure that every consumer could buy it, because otherwise 10th edition might not look like it's doing too good, and that would have been disastrous for the stock price of Games Workshop. So what does the launch of Leviathan tell us? Well, it tells us that the problem we're facing right now isn't really scalping. Scalping just sounds scary, like there's an organized cartel of supervillains out there dedicated to depriving the world of Warhammer. And I can tell you right now, that ain't true. Because if it was, then I would have been recruited. You would not be listening to Discourse minis. Instead, you would be watching Discord minis. But again, I'm not a supervillain. Yet. And while, yes, there are a small number of resellers that do exist, and they organize themselves on Facebook and Discord, it really doesn't seem to be very many people. If you go onto eBay, you'll find some resellers, but it's a few pages on eBay at most. For a healthy product line, this shouldn't make much of a large impact on availability. And this is borne out by what happened when Games Workshop reclaimed Siege of Terra limited edition books from resellers last month. The number of books that they then went on to sell back to consumers directly numbered in the tens to low hundreds. Scalping isn't really an epidemic. It's just an extremely visible and very obvious symptom to a deeper, more important underlying problem. And that problem is a limited supply with a high demand. And understanding that fact is how Games Workshop actually solved the scalping problem for Leviathan. They simply increased the supply to meet the demand. They printed so many boxes that you could make one hell of a box for it. They had the factory in Nottingham churning out Leviathan box after Leviathan box for God knows how long, to the exclusion of all else. In fact, they were so single-minded single-mindedly focused on Leviathan that in the run-up to the launch, it was almost impossible to buy anything Warhammer. And while that was great for Leviathan and for the launch of 10th edition, it's just not feasible for every single Warhammer release. The launch of 10th edition was a very special event, and even an additional factory isn't going to create enough supply going forward, not when Games Workshop have just released 2 entire new model ranges for 2 entirely new games in as many months. So what then? Are consumers just screwed? Do we have to accept that there's not enough supply for the demand? Are we going to be forced to buy from scalpers if we really want to get the latest product? Well, no, because there is another element to that low demand, high supply equation that Games Workshop can tweak: demand. Because ultimately, much of the seemingly insatiable demand from consumers is itself being manufactured directly by Games Workshop and being funneled into narrow sales windows. The demand for Warhammer is just too damn high. And when I say that, I don't mean that it's a bad thing that so many people want to buy miniatures. Quite the opposite. That's actually really good for wargaming. But the current demand and the way that it is being channeled is extremely unhealthy. See, when I say that there's an unhealthy demand in Warhammer, I'm not talking about the normal desire that people have to buy models to add to their army. As an example, I bought a Retributor squad the other day for my 3rd edition Witch Hunters army, all to play a game of Warhammer Remastered Prohammer, of which a video review is available on my Patreon this month. So if you're interested in playing some old school Warhammer, but remastered, then maybe check it out in the link below. But that's not the type of purchase that I'm talking about. These types of purchases, typically from established gamers, used to make up a pretty significant proportion of revenue for Games Workshop. But those erratic purchases used to be combined with a front-loaded amount of money from new hobbyists just getting into Warhammer who would buy up a load of products all at once. And as time went on and Games Workshop matured, they got seduced more and more by the massive splurges from these new wargamers. I mean, who hasn't been seduced by a massive splurge? And they fell out of love with smaller spread out purchases from established gamers. And as a result, Games Workshop have increasingly begun to chase a certain high. They're beginning to treat Warhammer less like a product that's a hobby project for younger kids and teens and adults, and more like a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering. Products are being sold with an artificially short shelf life, maximizing the fear of missing out and creating an unhealthy demand that allows Games Workshop to push the acceptable price point that consumers are willing to pay for Warhammer higher and higher. And this has all led us to today, a world where the Warhammer business model is now defined by hype. And every single week, we are inundated with posts about new releases, typically in limited edition box sets and bundled together as a value buy. All of this for a product, Warhammer, which is increasingly expensive and priced out of the reach for the average consumer outside of these value box sets. And these products can only be bought in a weekend pre-order window. Almost anyone involved in Warhammer today knows the word FOMO. If you want to buy anything new, you need to log in on a Saturday at 10 a.m. to be in with a chance to get what you want, or you'll simply miss out. Alternatively, of course, you can hope that your local game store will actually receive their orders from Games Workshop, which oftentimes they won't. And by the way, it looks like availability is about to get a whole lot worse, so even that avenue is slowly being shuttered down. Warhammer is currently stuck in a perpetual 2-week hype-filled release cycle now. It follows the same pattern over and over. News of a pre-order, massive queue-filled morning spent on the Warhammer website, lots of scalping and reselling, and then we all collectively move on to the next release. This is exactly the type of environment that scalping will flourish in. Warhammer has joined Ticketmaster concerts, Apple iPhones, and Turboman as industries dominated by massive hype, artificial scarcity, expensive price points, and consequently major scalping and reselling. And we can thank the Games Workshop business model for that. Games Workshop 100% bear responsibility for all of this. Scalping is just a symptom of a disease. Meanwhile, Games Workshop try to placate the larger consumer base by tinkering around with a new website, adding in a queuing system and a basic captcha, all in an attempt to have their cake and eat it too. do, to look like they're doing something, to weakly try to combat scalping, all the while retaining their massive revenue-busting scarcity model of model selling that encourages the practice in the first place. Not that they particularly care about scalping, of course. After all, scalpers show up on a spreadsheet exactly the same as a legitimate customer. If Games Workshop did really care, they'd produce far more made-to-order products, and they'd run the risk that they might have excess stock every so often. They wouldn't be selling their products as limited army box sets and go all in on the hype cycle. But they are, and it's extremely unhealthy for the game. Sure, it's generating maximum revenue, which is why Games Workshop's profits are so high right now, but it's extremely bad for long-term player retention. It's bad for wargamers right now who grow embittered and angry with every release, and it's bad for those who want a sustainable, healthy community of fellow wargamers to play games against, and also don't want to be paying like 3 times the market value for the latest Warhammer miniature. A miniature which is already about 3 times the market value of a standard miniature. The scalping, the lack of stock, this is all directly a result of Games Workshop's focus on monetizing older adults. Rather than simply keeping prices low, bringing in a wide variety of stock, and making sure that there's multiple accessible entrance points to the hobby, Games Workshop are instead raising prices. They're instead getting rid of things like start collecting boxes in favor of more expensive combat patrols, and they are pushing limited edition army box sets. This is all connected, it's all combined. We cannot separate the problem of stock, the resulting problem of scalping, all from the core business model and ideology of Games Workshop. And we can't just ask consumers to change their habits, because they won't. We've been conditioned into this, and we need Games Workshop to change how they do business. And that's exactly what I'm arguing for on this channel, so if you support that message and you want to help me fight for consumers and wargamers, then please subscribe to the channel, or join my Patreon for Discord chats, live streams, alternative wargame reviews, and even access to a free horror miniatures game. You can find that in the link below. I hope to see you there. And a massive thanks to my patrons, especially CryptoKev. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye!